of all time. We keep doing it. All right. Every week we talk about the most important thing.
It gets better and better. It's like The Bachelor.
Week.
It's the most dramatic episode yet. Every time.
Every single time. You've never seen what's going to happen. All right. So, we got Tim Seavey from San Diego. I am Jared Kubika Miller. I am your professor of communications, debate coach. We are sans Matt today. He's starting a coffee roasting business in Patagonia. So
he told me that it was mostly yak run, though.
Yeah,
like, I don't understand what that means. And he was like, no, like it's the only way to do it.
Yeah.
All right, Matt, like you do you. So yak run.
It's actually
Patagonian coffee.
Yeah, he meant yak dung. So it actually has to pass through the yak in order, and then they get it out of it, and then they roast it from there. Yeah,
that makes more sense.
Yeah.
That actually makes a lot more sense.
All right.
So what are we talking about?
Right.
It is.
Hey, I want to let it.
That means current events.
4th week. Right?
4th week. That's right. It is the 4th week. Yep. 4th week.
Yeah.
3rd week is technology.
4th week is we talk about the world, and we apply it to like what that might mean for competitive debate. This is pretty, like we do a lot of like limited prep debate. So if you come across an immigration topic, it's kind of like we're just kind of brainstorming some of the things to talk about. And the thing is, we now have artificial intelligence to help us with this brainstorming, and you're going to be seeing that throughout this episode today, because we are able to do a lot of brainstorming on a level that we've never been able to and prepare beforehand and stuff like that. So I think it's pretty awesome. All right, so we're going to be bringing that into it as well.
That time will never be the same.
I know it is a brave new world. That's not a great phrase to say because of the illusion, but the I was talking with another AI company just on Monday, Udily, and the term that they said that this is going to be like an inflection point in history. I'm like it might be. It just might be. I think that but we're here to talk about immigration. We will talk about artificial intelligence a lot over this season. So just to go there. All right. So here we go.
On the subject of immigration, big picture stuff, likely resolutions, topics. What does AI tell us we should be thinking about?
Okay. Well, one of the things I fed into ChatGPT was some debate terms that I'm familiar with, and I want to see if but obviously, of course, it is. It's just got this massive, and people write plenty on the internet about it. All right, so when it comes to immigration topics, they are the kind of topics, in my experience, that they can be very bi-directional. All right. And so what does that mean? I'll give a little pop up here. Bidirectionality means that it can go in two directions, obviously. But what that usually means is like kind of along either the political spectrum. It could be like really sort of, it could go the right wing direction or a left wing direction, or it could be about that it just allows you to increase restrictions or decrease restrictions on whatever you're talking about. So it just says change something. So if the topic is like the United States federal government should significantly reform its immigration policies.
Yeah.
That's bidirectional.
Yeah. So it can strengthen penalties for immigration. It can similarly significantly loosen or limit the penalties for immigration. So currently, like things that are in place that are causing issues or that are being pushed by states. So it's allows for really any direction so debaters can kind of take it whatever way they so choose.
Yeah. So I think this is really important if you're on the negative. Okay, you get your topic, you have 20 to 30 minutes to prepare, and it just says reform. You should be kind of going, darn it.
You gotta prep both sides now.
Yeah, like that's typically how you kind of have to prep both sides.
Yeah.
No, I do think there's some critical positions, which we'll get into a little bit, where doesn't matter no matter what. You know what I mean? It's like you can link, and that's why people go for it, or like that's at least one of the reasons why people like going for critical positions, is because it links no matter what. But yeah, you have to kind of like do, okay, are they going to increase restrictions, or are they going to decrease restrictions, because the topic is bidirectional?
Yeah.
All right. Besides that, when you talk about immigration reform, I think I don't know what I prefer doing is focusing on case analysis. You know, I mean, I guess that's kind of a classic way of doing things now, but you just like something that is like topical generally, you go for it. Now you might be restricted by the resolution, so this also might be sort of a brainstorming on potential topics that you might have to debate, right?
Yeah.
So like it could say whichever one. Tim, what do you think? We got a few cases that we got listed there. Any of them jumping out at you?
You know, there's a lot of directions to shoot for, but I think this one particularly jumps out at me. Just because this is so big and in the news, and I think it found its way into several resolutions, at least amongst the local party circuit. So implementation of the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, or DACA program. So that program, as I understand, was sunset. That was like a Trump era, like, how do we bring this to an end? But I also may be totally incorrect on that.
Man, you know what? You're right. Like, we got to do, like, there's so much stuff on immigration out there. I don't think I'm completely up to date on it. I do think that like they tried to end it quickly and the Supreme Court said no. Like I'm pretty sure that there was that particular ruling, but I think
that's right. Okay, so Trump did overturn it, and then Supreme Court pushed it back and said, nope, that's you cannot just through executive order push that through. It was a 5-4 decision, but yes, you're right.
Yeah. So if it comes back, so this might be more of a like passing a law rather than an executive order, kind of like making it the law, because like it's in like executive orders exist in this sort of legal limbo state, like because I mean, if a president just sort of implements it, doesn't mean that the next president can just like take it away,
stop doing it, stop funding it.
Yeah. But like even with that Supreme Court ruling, I'm like, I honestly, I didn't go in and read the freaking decision on why that was, but like, I'm like, that's interesting. I wonder why Trump just can't do it, because it was kind of an Obama thing. You know what I mean? It wasn't a piece of legislation that was passed or anything like that.
Right. So when we're saying this is a case, first off, this was generated by ChatGPT, which is cool, of just pulling out of the sphere of like, what is a case that should be discussed on this particular topic? I think this is a cool one because you've got a lot of pathos you can pull in talking about specific stories, and you can talk about like dreamers, and you can pull through, separations of families and things. I think there's a lot of like very real, very human impacts to some of these cases that I think give pretty sturdy ground. I don't think you'll see a lot of, I think depending on the circuit that you're on, you can start to do a bit of predicting, even when things are bidirectional. It's not likely that I think a team is going to pass something that overturns DACA, likely. So if you can imagine, they're probably going to expand it or do something on top of it or do something to, strengthen. I think that probably gives you some ground to be like, all right, now at least we know what we're arguing against. How do we take that further? How do we, write a pick for it, plan inclusive counter plan? Like, how do we, change the funding for it? Whatever we choose to do, but come up with a little bit craftier mechanism for it. Then again, depending on the part of the country you're in, maybe that's not the case. And maybe you see more reasonable legislation or case ideas that are floating out there that do overturn it or change something about DACA.
Okay. Yeah, I think I also, in my opinion, it's one of the more moderate of the immigration proposals. I mean, you're talking about a fairly small group, really well-defined sort of group of people. And some of the like typical arguments about immigration really don't apply. That like they're coming in and taking up additional resources. Like, no, they've been here for a lifetime, so like that's already kind of built into like we haven't like it hasn't tanked us yet. So like saying that there's going to be some, it lacks the uniqueness of a lot of the immigration arguments that people make.
Yeah.
Okay, now when ChatGPT threw this one out there, I'm like, oh,
yeah, spicy, right?
Yeah.
Like, oh damn, ChatGPT's
Yeah.
been reading some good gnarly debate forums.
Yeah, and so I'm going to generate an affirmative on this one. And
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, we
you know what I
definitely
mean?
should throw that
Because
into
I'm
our
like,
YouTube channel.
whoa, let's do it. Let's take a look at it. I'm like, those sort of like bold plans are the ones I'm like, how would you defend that? And
Yeah,
so
much more common stuff also I think that you see in open rounds. Up to this
Yeah.
point, honestly, when you and I have been kicking back and forth stuff on ChatGPT, it throws out not in a I don't mean this in a negative way, but it throws out fairly novice arguments, like the
Yeah.
fairly straight up expected topics that you would see on any given subject that like, oh, this makes sense. I would expect to see this in like a, regular college level research paper or something, but not something that is, well researched, intended to like craftily win rounds and cut to a particular critical angle or something. Those types of cases you tend to see in open level. This is a typical open case, I would expect. Like, I would be unsurprised to see this be an affirmative in an open round. So if that were what we were doing, where would you go with that?
Okay. If that one, and so I actually started generating some stuff. So for our viewers, if you want to see what an affirmative, like a full 6-minute speech on this one, I'm going to be producing that in like a matter of days. So some of the I like the arguments that were generated because I told it to generate a criterion. In order to use to focus the arguments, and then the arguments that followed it kind of fit with it as well, which was human rights. And so they kind of were a little redundant. So one of them was like, human rights violations at the hands of ICE on immigrants. So that like you're eliminating that, right? But then it started talking about like mass deportations, that it would eliminate mass deportations. But I told it to write a different advantage for refugees, and about how that. And so I don't know. Like when you're generating these things, you get to be the editor rather than the author. You know what I mean? It's kind of like, and you get to send back for draft after draft after draft, and you're not insulting the author because they don't have feelings. You know what I mean?
Well, so, careful there. I wouldn't start saying that too quickly, because then again, when they take over, you want them to be nice to you.
Yeah. So like those are the two advantages. So that's where I'd go with it. I'm like, oh, just filter everything through human rights, and you do it two advantages that are both human rights related, which would be like actual human rights violations from ICE, but then also sheltering people that are trying to escape human rights violations in their home country.
Yeah, very cool. I like that.
Yeah, so
that's cool. I think you can probably also say, I mean, I'm sure there's a lot you can talk about just in the world of funding, like the amount of funds that go to ICE could be more easily spent, even like beefing up, more local programs. So maybe there's some bad examples in like Arizona and Texas, but typically more like places like New Mexico, I think, tend to have some better programs. So I think what I would probably do is start trying to find programs that are doing effective work with like, migrant relation insofar as like how to, or where the best case scenarios come about. So when it's not like the awful shit that you see on the news, but instead the like, hey, here are some communities that are doing a much better job with integration and or like figuring out how we can, how systems can support and work out better, like where outcomes end up significantly better, and say like fund those types of programs. So there's been a lot of like law enforcement outreach programs around California that have shown to be significantly more effective. So look at those states that do have, a lot of migration coming into them. So you're probably not seeing a lot of examples in Kansas necessarily, but states that have large, bordering territory, and say what programs are working, let's fund those instead. I think that there's also something to be said for like the over militarization of border patrol. Like it's not treated as a, like more regularly, national security is the number one priority versus like human rights. And that becomes a very otherizing, like, how do we create this terror talk kind of like us versus them approach to it, which is inherently awful, ends up like producing really bad things. So kind of cool that ChatGPT also came up with another one when it starts getting into some language critiques.
Yeah.
So
That's what I
othering is
kinda-
a real popular one in the circuit. We were debating a lot.
I think that I would keep this in my pocket as the affirmative. You know what I mean? It's like I'd be waiting to unleash this if it was like IPDA, if it's one-on-one, then this is like rebuttal type material coming over the top. You know what I mean? This is how I'm answering disadvantages and counterplans and things like that. You know, I don't know. That's how I kind of see it. I'm not seeing how the negative would necessarily get to use it though. Or like I also don't. I guess you could critique our current system as othering. I used to call it otherizing. I wonder. Interesting. So what was I saying? Oh, like
You were saying it would be more like affirmative ground. If you're doing, I'm saying that if that's the ICE case, I'm saying if you're doing, you know, many other immigration policies, this is typically, I think, would be expected to be neg ground. But if the affirmative case is doing something that really significantly expands immigration policy or like loosens restrictions, etc., I think there is still some opportunity for that, because I think that it is still being a language critique. It is not necessarily just here's a policy that you're doing. It is the way that we're talking about it, and there are pre-fiat implications, right? Like before this silly round where we're going to talk about stuff that doesn't actually happen, let's discuss the ways in which we're, you know, talking about migrant people and the differentiated. So as GPT actually brings up, which is kind of funny, like how there's this fundamental difference and a like almost innate hierarchy that's always placed between like, well, citizens get to blah, 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 blah. And there's always like this halo effect put around people talking about, well, citizens and all of their, you know, rights that might be taken or whatever. And then immigrants being like this other group that almost always has a, you know, a horns like negative connotation to it. So I think that's where you can start, you know, pulling in, or that's where I see othering language critiques come about. And that type of language comes about from, you know, any direction of affirmative. So I think that it's still opportunity for both teams to throw that out there. But I think it's cool that AI came up with that one for this.
Yeah. No, it could even be a way of critiquing ICE. It wouldn't be a pre-fiat critique, but you could critique ICE that way. And it would be, it'd be like you could use that as like if you wanted to get on that level, that'd be cool.
Yeah, I think even if the other team has something like a, you know, a value of homeland security defense or like, you know, domestic security or national security, like really, which nation? Like, who's security, right? Like who is securing who from whom? That kind of thing, I think, are really important to break that down, because like, sure, you've got your really honorable backing that you're trying to support here, and someone is in mortal danger and they're now entering other mortal danger. Does that make us the good guys, or does that like who are we talking about here? Like, is the actor that you're choosing actually doing something better?
I want to jump back to one of the cases just on a current events level. Like if you want to go for a ripped from the headlines type of approach, which I think a lot of people like. If you do extemp as well as debate, this might so the public health order discussion. So that was from the pandemic. So Trump imposed that when he had the opportunity to. So and it was, you know, under I forget what the section of law is called, but it's under like the public health section. So, you know, and so the rationale and the justification is COVID. But at the same time that they're making the arguments for, you know, shutting off the border because of COVID, at the same time they're like, COVID's not that big a deal, you know?
Right?
Like those two simultaneous arguments, and kind of go like, let's stop pretending that this is a public health order or does anything for public health. It's a public health order, but let's not pretend like it actually is affecting public health policy, you know? And so just getting rid of that. But that was just struck down again. Like it was another executive order that, you know, Biden was trying to discontinue. And then the Supreme Court said, nope, you can't do that. And so I'm like, interesting. I think it's just a stay though. I think they have to they're like, you can't do it the way you said you're going to do it. There's a process to it. I think that might be it.
Yeah. But, procedural arguments are fascinating. The fact that like we get to, you know, feel like we're getting really good at them in debate, but then it turns out like you can make, you know, decade-long careers out of it in politics, because procedural arguments are like half the way that stuff gets passed or not passed or funded or not funded, just from little language pieces and how stuff is implemented. So entire disciplines of law. But yeah, so I think that's certainly a fascinating one. Where you're going on that, I think like one, it behooves the affirmative to figure out what is the appropriate method. Like, what is the correct way? Does it need to be an act of Congress? Is that something that needs to be an act from the Department of Health and Human Services? Like, does the NIH have to roll that back, or the CDC? Is that like, who is the actor here? Because I think it's probably important, and you probably could get yourself into some hot water with like a spec, so an authority or agent specification. Like, if you're using the wrong party to do this, that's why perhaps that's why the Supreme Court struck it down, and so you end up losing access to solvency and things like that if you're using the wrong party. Or that could be some really cool, tricky negative ground of like, oh, looks like you're just doing this through normal means. Can you tell me what that is? Oh, Congress. Okay, well, here's why that doesn't work, or whatever that happens to be. So I think that's some fun spec ground.
Let's do a little bit more on the negative, because by the way, I even put in ChatGPT. I'm like, what are some clever negative strategies I can do? It's like, well, you could do a counterplan, but it's just like,
it just said, okay.
Yeah, counterplans are like inherently creative according to ChatGPT. Like, if you run a counterplan, it's like, that's great creativity right there.
And they're wily and they're cheating. It's like the curveball in baseball. When the curveball was first invented, Harvard. So there were like only a couple universities in the United States that like had teams, and they said that we understand that this new curveball pitch is an intention to deceive the batter, and we at Harvard are not in the business of deception. Like, so we will not be using the curveball. Like, that's cool. Okay, like that. God. We at Harvard are not in the business of deception.
But it did spit out this one. There you go. Like the good old Cap K, man.
Hey.
Good old Cap. And it's like, and it's right. You can easily make a Cap critique on pretty much any immigration reform.
Any direction it goes too.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, because there's no way to avoid that. I just don't think that. I don't know about you, but
I think in any direction, right? So whether it's like we're going to close down the borders, now that pushes significantly more pressure onto foreign production, and that means like some of the labor, the trade abuse that comes from like cross border negotiations of like, well, we control the food, so therefore we're going to set the price for whatever, and that exploits labor in countries that don't have labor laws nearly as much. Or even to the opposite end of like, no, we need to like loosen border stuff, and they're like, all right, let's talk about the majority of positions, like non-documented positions that end up being made to folks without papers or folks that don't have the same citizenship status, and it's like all kinds of labor abuses and things, because that's just like the powers that be. So you think you look like you're kind of being a savior here, when in fact you're actually just like creating blood to grease the wheels of capitalism. Like, there's all kinds of things happening on all sides.
Yeah, I mean, because inherently migrants take jobs that native citizens are just bypassing all the time. There's plenty of examples of people that are kind of like, hey, we'll pay you minimum wage to do some agricultural work, and then nobody shows up, or like there's a crackdown on undocumented immigrant populations, and then all of a sudden there's food rotting in the fields because nobody is willing to do that. And so that's an indication of the sort of relationship that capitalism sets up, right? That creates the division between people and the haves and the have-nots, and
even like recruiting tactics and things of like where jobs are made, where opportunities are made available. Like, well, there's all kinds of job postings for up and coming positions and lots of growth and things on college campuses all over the place. And guess what's not made available? Like, guess what job postings are made available, and where there are job opportunities, big air quotes opportunities, brought up around like Social Security office departments and things like that, or where there are people that are starting to go through these really, really awful bureaucratic processes to gain citizenship. Like, it's not those same opportunities. That's not where technical recruiters tend to be going. So there's, even just the reflections of what capitalism wants and does not want, or, how that, like, the inherent, like, racism and things that come about through that. So I think you've got a lot of interesting ground, no matter what direction the affirmative goes, that you can definitely still link into.
Yeah, I mean, like, and especially if anyone wants to make the sort of reflexive, like, "Hey, this is cheap labor" type of argument. It's kind of like,
Yeah.
it's like we could get stuff for a lot cheaper. It's like it doesn't immediately strike a lot of people as problematic. When he's
Yeah.
saying that, it's like I could really see a beginning debater saying something
Mhm.
like that. It's like this is a great way to like get people in that will like make my sandwich for very, very cheaply, and I'm like,
And then you say, ha 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 ha, you should not be winning this round.
yeah, right.
That
And
is
so,
not an okay thing to say, but let's
yeah,
learn. Let's learn why.
yeah. Yeah, I think
Yep.
that'd be oh man, that'd be heartbreaking just to see that. But I guess it is one way to learn.
It is.
Um,
Yep.
one argument that it didn't come up with was so I did ask for other sort of typical arguments. It's kind of like,
Mhm.
like social services, you can make the argument, or like culture, which I would not make that argument. I don't know what the American culture is. I know we have lots of them, so
Mm.
like whatever. But what it didn't come up with was one of my favorite ones, which was a borders
I was
critique.
gonna say, like, a borders critique of just like they are the worst. Like
Yeah.
they're the problem, and like these imaginary lines that we draw that don't mean anything, but then end up like dictating millions and billions of lives.
Yeah. I mean, like
And I think that's popular enough. It's on enough message boards. Like obviously the CapK is probably the most popular one out there. So makes sense that ChatGPT came across it at some point. But yeah, I'm a little surprised it didn't come across the borders K at some point.
yeah. Well, I mean, like I could just directly ask it to like write one up, and it will. But it wasn't on its short list of like creative ideas, and so I think that would be um, high up there because it's
Sure.
really topical. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's like I love topical critiques. Not That's part of the reason I'm not a big fan of the capitalism critique. Not because I don't agree with any like the sort
Mhm.
of fundamental arguments. It's like I kind of think that there's value in diversity of your thought and arguments that you make and stuff like that. I do
Yeah.
also think that there's value in honing and perfecting arguments, but I don't know. I'm a bit more of a generalist that way, I think, and so the borders one is like you can't make that in every single round. So you're like, hey, I'm ready for my immigration round with
Right.
my borders critique, and I think that's pretty dope, and not too many
Yeah.
people know it. Yeah, I don't
Sure.
know. You ever run into a borders critique?
I've judged them, have not run into one in a round.
I try to bring one up in like one of my classes when I was like a senior, and it was like some women's studies thing, and my professor is like, I don't need to hear this.
Ooh, someone took
I'm just so stoked on
intercultural
it.
prom. We're so proud of you. Okay, let's get back to what we're supposed to be learning. Like on the subject of applying the wrong critique at the wrong time.
Yeah.
Have you ever heard?
Oh
I
man.
don't really think that it's. I think it's basically just like a borders K, but someone just wanted to be a little bit more creative. Have you ever seen the cartography critique?
Oh, that seems vaguely familiar. And
So I think about it all the time now. Just whenever I see art that is a world map, so like it's just common art. And someone pointed out to me, so like the cartography critique says that England is at the upper center, like the top center of the map, because all of the cartographers that drew the map as we know it are from England. So they, of course, were like, yep, this is the top center. Everything else is less
yeah.
than. And also, even the proportions of countries and things like that end up like reflecting that country's value from like a capitalist sense. And so there's just all kinds of things of like, look, we can deprioritize all these areas. So like, Pan-Asian communities are like, yeah, these tiny little whatever things, and they're always on the back and you can't really see them and they're like halfway cut off. And so it allows for areas to be seen as like more or less important based on how easily identifiable they are based on cartography from like old dead white guys. I don't think it's that compelling, but it was just an interesting like philosophical discussion of like, okay, that's kind of cool. Like I see where you're going with something like that. But the alt is like just reject maps or some stuff. Like I don't get how you
globes. You must only use globes.
Burn all the globes. No, it's all flat anyways. We all know that.
I heard about that one time that someone ran that as a case, in fact, where they like a different map. There's a specific type of map that was the alternative and it was supposed to be better, right? And I had to brainstorm like, oh my God, if I was the negative, what would I say on that one? And I'm like, globes. That's the only thing. You ban maps. Only
no
globes.
maps. Everyone gets a globe. Counter plan. Everyone gets a globe. I like it.
All right. Hey, I liked this. I think that like all the ideas that we are generating off of this, the stuff that we, it kind of like creates synergy with artificial intelligence. Definitely, I don't know. I'm a fan. Gonna do it again.
I don't think we created a lot of those ideas. I think AI told us what to think, and then we just get to like fill in little gaps, which is just right with me.
Yeah,
but leveraging technology for the betterment of labor.
It didn't come up with the borders, K. That was
yeah, right? Stupid idiot.
Right? And the bi-directionality, I fed that into it. Yeah. So
well, good. It'll make us feel better so long as we feel smarter than the robots at the end of each round. Like we'll think of 2 or 3 things and be like, yeah, suck it, robots.
All right, everybody. Hey, it's Tim and Jared. We're Debate Sensei. We'll see you next week. All right.
Stay classy.